Hear me okay? You could hear me okay? Yes. So when we were speaking with Hannah about the programming for this conference or this summit, she had said, or she had maybe talked about maybe doing this session right before happy hour. And so I'm not sure if it's worse to go right after lunch or right before happy hour, but I think she picked the right time. As Hannah mentioned, my name is Carlos Gallinar. I'm with El Paso Independent School District. I want to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about a bond, similarly to what Scott had just mentioned, but I wanted to maybe share with you some best practices just in terms of things that we're doing. So far, we're in year one of a 5-year program, so I just wanted to share with you a few things. So I'll start with the district snapshot. Can we get the timer on the presentation going? So El Paso Independent School District, we have 58 elementary schools, 15 middle schools, about 10 high schools. In total, we have about 92 different facilities, campuses. We have an enrollment of about 60,000 students, 8,000 employees, and then we try to keep our ratio, even though it just fluctuates depending on the school, but 14-to-1 student to teacher ratio. We are the 12th largest school district in Texas and the largest school district along the Texas-Mexico border. The district serves students living in 253 square miles, and this is because we have an open enrollment district. So anywhere in El Paso County, if you want to bring your child to EPISD schools, you can. Again, about 8,000 people employed. We bus 3.2 miles each year. Cafeteria serves 10.8 meals per year, and then our custodians service 10.7 million square feet of facilities. So even though we are so EPISD, largest urban school district in El Paso County, largest and oldest school district in El Paso County, and as I think many of you will recognize being from larger sort of regional areas, our enrollment is declining and has been for the past many, many years, right? We're competing not only with charter schools, although it's not as big an issue as it is in Dallas, but we are competing with suburban school districts. And so over the past many years, our utilization rate in many of our campuses is at 76%. Which means that we are operating facilities that are at 76% capacity. In some cases, we have some schools, some elementary schools that are about 50% capacity. So schools that were designed, say for example, 800, 900 student capacity, have enrollments of about 350, 400 student capacity. And so similar to what Scott mentioned, part of our bond program will look to consolidate many of the elementary schools. And so we also recognize that many of our facilities are older. They're obsolete, and so we went out after this time last year, for a bond for $668 million. Not as quite as large as Dallas, but nevertheless the largest in El Paso County. And so for those of you who are not from Texas, and I think it's the same in many other states, school districts, really the only mechanism that we have to fix schools is through the sale of bonds, right? The largest ones being bonds that are voter approved. And so for many years, EPISD had deferred maintenance on many of our facilities. So we have not only declining population, older schools, not as high capacity utilization, and so we didn't have the resources to really start fixing these schools. And so part of the overall bond program strategy is to do renovations, new construction, and there's some technology and transportation initiatives rolled into the bond. Prior to us going after the bond in November of last year, we spent the previous 6 months from March through August with a facilities advisory committee. And so what this committee made of about 80 people throughout this sector of the community. They spent many, many months looking at data, looking at the facility condition index. Those of you who are in facilities know the FCI of every single campus, looked at the student enrollment, and they came up with a recommendation for the actual bond projects. And so, as I mentioned, with $668 million, we had some construction and renovations. We have some consolidations. We have athletics upgrades like turf and track and playgrounds. We also have technology. EPISD is one of the School of Innovations in Texas, one of the first ones. And so we are moving towards not only 21st century learning environments, which we could spend a good deal of conversation on, but we are also doing new tech in many of our classrooms. And so if you know that, it's technology driven. And so the technology piece here will equip middle school and high school students with an Apple MacBook Pro. And then we have buses and we have safety and security. So then, we spend this whole time advocating for the bond, and then, as I mentioned last year, EPSD bond becomes the largest in the county's history. And so there was a lot of pressure put upon us to deliver. And so what I wanted to do for the next several minutes is spend some time just talking about some of the best practices that we've implemented so far. These include the specificity of the projects, right? I think it's important that voters and parents and students and teachers recognize the very specific projects that we're doing, and so I'll walk you through that. Scott had mentioned this. We did hire a program manager. I think there's some pros and cons in our estimation. Based on the timeline and the budget that we were given by the Board of Trustees, we felt it was important to hire a program manager. Had we gone through our typical HR process, a year later, we'd still be hiring project managers, right? It takes such a long time that you're able to sort of have a third party manage the bond for you. And then have some high degree of transparency, include community planning in your initiatives, and then I want to speak a little bit about the change in delivery methods. Many of us do competitive seal proposals, but we're moving towards a construction manager at risk, which I think that does offer some benefits, especially if the projects are of a high risk and sort of many moving pieces. So the best practices, right? So be specific. One of the things that the board did initially, because I think, let me pause for a minute. Who is currently going through either a bond election campaign and or is managing a bond construction program right now? Okay, so quite a bit, okay. So what our Board of Trustees did early on is that they were very specific, right? There had been some criticism of EPSD in the past that, hey guys, you go after bonds and then you change the projects midway, whether it's political or for whatever reason. And so what the board did initially is that they were very specific and they did what they called a contract with the voter. And so this was an action item that was voted on early on, even before the bond passed. I just circled some of the high schools, some of the specificity of different projects. And so what we are now tasked with is that for the next 5 years, we have a mandate based on what the board approved, and we know exactly what projects we're going to be doing. Remember, I mentioned there's about 92 campuses. This is only for 17 campuses. We're going to consolidate another 8 to 9 schools. So in totality, it's about 25 schools that we're touching or are consolidating, closing, but there's still a greater need. The other thing, too, that the board did is set a 5-year timeline. And so between last year and the year 2021, we will be working through these construction projects. And so again, there's the specificity, the very specific timeline and budget and projects, and I think it's very important that you set those expectations early on so that voters know what they will be approving. As I mentioned, we did hire a program manager. In our case, we hired Jacobs Consulting, a great outfit. They do a whole bunch of work all over Texas, really all over the world. But in our estimation, they were the best group that we were able to procure. What happens in this regard is that they are now, as I mentioned, had we gone through our typical HR process, we would have still been hiring 10 to 12 different project managers just now. They, in turn, will hire 10 to 12 different project managers. They have a program manager, they have an architect, they have cost estimators, they have all sorts of folks working within the bond program to ensure that we're staying within budget and that we're delivering within the next 5 years. The other thing, too, that I wanted to talk about is transparency, right? There's this sort of, in government, notion that government is not transparent. And so one of the things that we did as we move forward, first of all, we have, and if you go to episd.org, there's a tab that takes you to our bond webpage, full of information, full of reports, full of presentations. We have every campus and every project has its own webpage. But one of the things that we did is a dashboard. And so this is just a screenshot of the dashboard that we have in place. But it might be a little bit hard to read, but you have the total budget on a month-to-month basis, which is here. We're showing the public the expenditures on a month-to-month basis. The other thing, too, that the dashboard does is that if you click on any one project, it then gives you very specific financial information for that project, whether we spend in pre-development or soft costs or hard costs or A&E. And as we move through the project, those numbers will obviously change. But there's a running total here, and then this is also the timeline for each project. So if you scroll through, if you put your cursor through this thing, it tells you where in development or where within the phase of construction we're currently at. And that's been a really helpful tool because, again, it's not just Carlos Gallinar or any one of my staff saying, this is the budget, it hasn't changed. You could direct people to a public dashboard that they could review. The other thing, too, that we've done, which is something quite extraordinary, we have a really great, robust public participation process. These are just some of the things that we've looked at. I'm going to focus on 3, the school project committees, because I think it's been one of our most successful aspects of our community outreach strategies. The bond website and dashboard, which I had mentioned, and then special events. And so what we had asked, remember there's 17 projects, what we asked every single principal is to form a school project committee. We kept it to about 10 to 12 participants, and it was anywhere between teachers, some parents, and some students, and some community members to sit on this committee. And so what we've done over the past 12 months, and we'll continue to do over the next 48 months or so, is have a very specific school project committee that vets the architects, vets the program. We're currently now in schematic for many of these projects. So they've been able to participate in different phases of the design, and then we'll also participate in the construction meetings. This is just something that we have up on our Facebook page. And so this is as of October. We've had over 50 school project committee meetings, and then there's about 20 SPC members throughout the district working on this bond. One of the things, too, that we're doing, we have a Facebook page, and so we have a very specific EPSD bond 2016 tag. The thing that I wanted to mention here is I mentioned the SPC. We have SPC, but we also have student-led charrettes or design processes. And so this is at El Paso High School. This is the principal, the student council, a number of fine art participants. So we went out to the different schools to make sure that we're getting the advice and input from the different students. We also had a furniture fair. And so, as I mentioned, I could spend another hour talking about 21st century learning environments, but one of the big pushes that we're doing with the new renovations and new construction is active learning spaces. If you're familiar with 21st century learning environments, you know that furniture and technology are a big part of that curriculum. And so we had a furniture fair when we invited several furniture vendors to come to El Paso. They set up shop. The teachers and students were able to sit on the chairs, do the desks, feel the furniture, so that when we start procuring our FF&E down the road, they've had an idea of what to expect in terms of the furniture that will be going into the classroom. We've also had events, and so this is a screening that we had also at El Paso High School about a month ago, and we screened the movie, the documentary Most Likely to Succeed, deals with 21st century learning environments, and so the idea, you all, is that as we move through the bond, it's important to, not only do your technical aspects, your design and engineering workshops, but it's also fun and builds community when you do these sort of different types of events throughout the district. I said I'd spent some time with the CMART process. So in Texas, you have to, if a board of trustees or any school government body is to change a procurement method, we have to sort of take it to the board. So for El Paso ISD, like I'd imagine for many of you, we do design bid build, we do competitive sealed proposals, you get the lowest bid, maybe you have some other factors. But one of the things that we're moving towards, because of the complexity of the projects, many of the projects that we have will have students within the campus, obviously, will have some degree of combination of renovations and new construction. We'll have different types of facility, whether it's academic or athletic. And so one of the things that we're moving towards is construction manager at risk. And so essentially what this is, for those of you who may not be familiar with CMAR, is that you hire the contractor early on. We've hired architects in May, in June and July, and we're now in the process of hiring CMARs. Remember, there are 17 projects. We're only doing CMAR for about 6-7 projects because we also feel that some of the other projects can be procured or delivered through other conventional delivery methods. And so if you're thinking about delivery methods, if you're thinking of flexibility, you may want to consider the CMAR process. It's not for everyone, especially with a board or a community that's not familiar and has not done CMAR process. And so there's this education component that you're going to have to go through. But I think that when you weigh the pros and the cons, there is some benefit to a CMAR delivery method for some of your projects. Again, maybe not for all. I wanted to close out just by talking a little bit about the third place in health. I'm an urban planner by profession and by training. And so urban planners spend a lot of time talking about open spaces and streets and parks and public spaces because of what they do for a community. There is this definition by the World Health Organization that says that just because you don't feel sick does not mean that you're not sick, right? So if you look at the totality of someone's health, it's the mental, it's the social, and it's the physical well-being. And so there is this great book called The Great Good Place by Ray Oldenburg that talks about this third place, right? So he says, when residents are invested in shared spaces beyond their private homes, a bond emerges with others who are similarly invested. Conversely, the more time that people spend away from the public eye at home, the more disinvestment there is in community social capital. So what he's saying is that there's this sort of third place. Many folks go to work, and many folks go to stay at home, and then there should be this third place, right? That builds community, that you sort of feel good about running into your neighbor, that you feel good about having walked into a friend or someone that you haven't seen in a while, right? There's sort of sense that there's a sense of community within these third places. Again, urban planners spend a lot of time concentrating on public spaces, so I'm just gonna walk you through some of these, right? So you have the neighborhood bar, which could be a third place. You have the neighborhood diner. Everyone remember this from Happy Days, right? They spend a lot of time at the neighborhood diner. You have the neighborhood coffee shop. This is from the TV show Friends as well. Did I mention the neighborhood bar? Yeah. And then you have the neighborhood park, right? So these are sort of public spaces, semi-public, private places that people have an ability to go to. For many people, the third place could be the social network, which is Facebook, right? We spend a lot of time on our devices. But also consider this for children, right? So children don't have a third place. Their really first place is if they grow up in a healthy, welcoming home, if they're lucky enough, they have their first place, and then they have their second place. And that second place is school. And so that's why I feel that the work that we're doing through facilities, whether it's planning or bonds or renovations or new construction, is so vital to the importance of young men and women and children in particular. And so, I talk to my staff all the time because those of you who are in facilities would recognize this, that you're not going to get an email. We're not going to get a pat in the back. No one's going to stop us at the grocery store and say, hey, Carlos, you guys are doing a great job. It's the opposite, right? It's when we're not getting emails. It's when we're not getting texts from the superintendent. It's when there's sort of no news is good news because we know that the facilities, the lights are turned on, the air conditioning is working, the plumbing is working. And so don't expect us to get sort of have a celebratory month, right, for facility planners or facilitators, a month of October, whatever it is. But it is what it is, and it's important work. And the reason that I think it's important work is because of again, the amount of time that children, many of our children, nieces and nephews, our friends' children spend in the classroom. And so I just wanted to end with that to let you know that the work that you are doing is vitally important to the future of these young men and women. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.